Welcome to the event, and we're incredibly privileged and very delighted to have Richard Spalding join us this morning from CBA. Richard's a CIO at the CBA. He's the biggest advocate of TBM and a seasoned campaigner in terms of TBM capabilities and TBM implementation. So he's going to share lots of insight with us this morning. And today's session is going to be very interactive, and I encourage you to put your questions to Richard in the chat. It's not often that we have a senior executive from a large organization join us and give us the ability to have a Q&A. So let's make the most of that. As you know, this is part of a regular series of TBM Tuesdays. We do one every month, and so once again, thank you for joining our session. I might throw over to Richard for a quick self-intro, and then we'll get into the discussion. So, Richard, welcome to TBM Tuesday.
Thanks, Zahid, and good morning or good evening, everyone, depending on where you are. So thanks for the intro, Zahid. I mean, I'll just give a quick download. I'm just conscious of time. But in my career, I started off as an accountant, ended up in my early career working at UBS in London in a finance team supporting technology, which back in the year 2000 wasn't really a field or an intersection of fields I really knew existed, but that's where I found myself, and ended up sort of staying in that discipline in some shape or form for the next 20 years as the field of tech finance evolved, and as large companies and banks, healthcare companies, governments, etc., telco, media, their technology budgets became more and more I guess fundamental to their business strategy, and therefore they needed to make sure they're getting value for money out of it, whether that's trying to drive efficiency out of the run dollar or making sure that they felt they were getting an ROI out of the change dollar. That role led me to effectively working my way through a number of roles in the technology finance field, up to an infrastructure CFO role at UBS, eventually an IT CFO role at Nomura, the Japanese bank, after they bought Lehman Brothers when it went bankrupt. And then from there, I moved into more technology COO roles. And then eventually returning back to Australia, I found myself back in technology finance for a little bit as CBA was trying to mature its model around cost transparency, and then eventually after a program of work there to re-implement Aptio to support a more strategic agenda, I moved back over to the IT side as a divisional CIO for finance. So instead of doing the CFO to the CIO role, I'm now doing the CIO to the CFO role. So, and having spent much of my career pioneering TBM, I've had a long association with Aptio since my days in the US when it was still an early stage growth company. So I've been part of their journey as much as they've been part of mine. But I was thinking, like, for today's conversation, because I'm now having to, I used to say eat my own dog food, but I think the better phrase is drink your own champagne. So I kind of feel I can probably offer maybe a unique perspective on someone who's helped design and implement TBM and be a practitioner of it when I was in finance, but now having spent the past 3 years being a consumer of it. And I'm sure there's others on the call here that either you're going to be in finance or you're going to be in IT, and often the finance folk will ask questions around IT sponsorship, and the IT folks will ask questions about finance sponsorship. So I'm hopeful today that if there are questions of that nature, maybe I can offer perspective from both sides, if that's helpful. Of course, we can talk about other common challenges. I'm sure you're all having to mature your data models as you get deeper in your TBM journeys. You're having to deal with new ways of working, and as organizations move towards new ways of working, it can create new and different challenges around stakeholder engagement. So they're just a couple of topics that I'm happy to chat about, but whatever's on people's minds that they think would be helpful for the rest of the group, happy to take any questions.
Wonderful. Thank you, Richard. And I should add that with respect to TBM Council in Asia Pacific, Richard is one of the regional advisory board members. We have 8 senior executives, and we're very lucky to have these senior execs spend their time and energy and give us direction and support. And Richard is one of the key executives supporting us through that. As we mentioned, if you have any questions or if you think about some concepts or some issues that you might want to put on the table, please put them in the chat. There is also a link in the chat to the TBM Council membership, and if you're not a member already for the TBM Council, please join up. Okay, and that's enough selling from me. I'm not going to sell anymore. Let's get started. I've got a couple of they're not Dorothy Dixes as much, but there are a couple of fundamental questions for you, Richard. So why don't we start off at the top? TBM, and we're talking about executive sponsorship and influence in TBM programs. TBM often gets pigeonholed as a finance or a reporting tool. And I think we've all been in that place where we've created the TBM framework and we've got some really great insights and things. But the organizations tend to treat it as a reporting tool, as opposed to a strategic needle mover or an enabler. In your experience, how do you keep TBM at the executive table in the right discussion rather than just a rudimentary tool for financial reporting?
Well, I think maybe to start at the beginning, and those who've heard me talk at some of the prior user conferences and so on in the past, is I think it's really important that your TBM journey is anchored in a strategic business problem. Very often, the visible edge of that problem can be a proliferation of spreadsheets and arguments between tech and finance, or between finance and finance. That's the visible edge of a problem. But it is not the problem in of itself. The business problem that organizations I've worked at have faced, they vary. So when I was at UBS post GFC, they were having to to stay as a viable business. There was a huge focus on cost efficiency and return on assets to stay viable. They had to sell very profitable parts of their business to stay afloat. Bearing in mind that they had a $15 billion write-off of subprime mortgage securities and took a $6 billion bailout from the Swiss government. So their existential business problem was, we've got to squeeze every bit of value out of our IT dollar, in fact, every dollar. So for them, their TBM journey was anchored around, how do we get our IT operations more efficient? And we need information to do that, which today is difficult because it's all in spreadsheets and so on and so on. So getting from spreadsheets to the tool is not the business problem. That might be a quality of life improvement for some, but in of itself isn't the real business problem. At Nomura, they just bought Lehman Brothers. They acquired a bunch of people and tin, but they had no idea how much they were actually spending to run and maintain what they've just acquired. So mission number one was find that out, map it all, get it all in, create transparency. At the same time, they're then trying to use that as a springboard to become a top tier global bank. So they were writing very big investment checks. So having solved the problem of what are we spending per annum on IT and where are we spending it, the focus shifted. So to move again, the focus shifted very quickly to providing transparency to the lines of business that were writing some big checks in technology. And it became more of a facilitated a value conversation between technology and the business. At CBA, when we re-implemented Aptio here, the business problem there was under the group CIO that we had at the time, there was a benchmark that had been done that basically said our technology cost base is, I don't know, a couple $100 million higher than it should be because we have too many apps with too much infrastructure and too many people supporting that infrastructure in the wrong locations. So the conclusion was, well, we've then got to think about rationalizing those applications and optimizing how those applications are configured. But to do that, what do you need? You need transparency into the TCO of your applications so that you can be surgical. Otherwise, things like hardware, software, people, they just look like expense items in a P&L. And you really, that's not the right tool for the job that you have to do. So for that, it was very much how do you create that transparency so that we can be really clear on which of the legacy apps we should decommission or rationalize first to get the biggest bang for buck. In all of those three use cases, I mean, the question around how do you keep TBM relevant, I think we should also bear in mind that having anchored it to a problem, if you've substantially solved that problem, as an organization, what I've learned in my current role, but I didn't really appreciate when I was on the other side. When I was on the other side, TBM was all consuming. It was a secret sauce. I had invested my life's work into it. I was constantly trying to promote it. Having been on the other side, my business problems, that's just one of, costs are just one of many problems. Cyber threats are another. There's risk. There's workforce management, ways of working. There's all the things we have to deliver to the business. So, if you solve the problem, if you have a risk problem and you put a focused effort on mitigating and managing your risk and that's done, you don't then continue going hard on risk management tooling. You move on to whatever's the next problem. So I think I've sort of relaxed my mindset a little bit, Zahid, around if you have a business problem, TBM can help solve it. If you solve it, you move into a bit more of a now we use it to keep our house in order mode, which is what we do here at CBA today. We use it very organically. We don't have big, there isn't the same big hoo-ha around it that maybe we had 4 years ago, but it's very much embedded in I use App TCO in my daily life. Every time I get a question about my cost base, or every time a vendor puts a proposal in front of me that says we can reduce your TCO, I've got the data to now facilitate those decisions. So it's a bit more organic. But look, if at some point in the future the bank decides we need to reduce the size of the cost base by 30% again, TBM will have a front row seat to that.
Yeah. How does TBM stay abreast of those business changes? So you just mentioned, if CBA was to have another challenge, how are the TBM folks best positioned to become aware of these issues and to kind of say, hey, I can help in this space, or hey, TBM has got this capability that can be used?
Well, certainly when I was, in my former role, I mean, I've always been, as an individual, I've always been someone that is a keen observer of the organization. I don't just do my job within the box that I live within. I'm always peering over the top of it, and I'm looking, outward and upward at, what is the group strategy, what are the group's problems, what are our executives spending time on, and turning my ear to when they talk, listen, really listen. Don't listen just for your chance to tell them about something about TBM, but really listen to the problems the business problems they're staring into. And then you can ask yourself, could TBM play a role in solving that? And if you think the answer is yes, then seek time with those individuals to bounce your thoughts, ideas, build alignment. And from those, it's very often from those conversations that, any initiative, be it tactical or more strategic, will be born from. That, in my experience anyway, as opposed to a meeting with myself and fellow like-minded individuals where we create a solution looking for a problem. So, and that's where you can, if it feels like you're selling ice to Eskimos, that's because you're spending too much time focusing on the solution and maybe not enough time meeting and talking and listening to other leaders or even your customers in the organization to think, really about, what are our business problems, and how can we solve them?
I think, and excuse me if we kind of go a little bit off track, but I think it's really important what you've just said. In terms of engaging with the business as a TBM practitioner or a TBM executive, it's sometimes you're going into somebody else's territory, and they may turn around and say, bugger off.
That's right.
I'll come to you when I'm ready to come to you.
That's right.
So what are some of the approaches that you might take? I mean, I presume you've got to be pretty resilient to say, well, I can take a rejection. I'm willing to, get a bloodied nose for the sake of doing the right thing, kind of thing. What would be, one or two approaches from your point of view, being a CIO now, to hear from a TBM person, and what would you want to hear to let them in the door?
Yeah. Well, I think in my current role, one thing I've learned is I had nowhere near enough time to look at all the 100+ dashboards that in my former roles, me and my colleagues and team had spent the care and time to build. I think the challenge with TBM is it does serve a fairly wide audience of people, from people in your revenue generating divisions who use technology, right? And you're allocating those IT costs to their business lines. So you've got that group of stakeholders. You've got the CIOs who are probably driving 60 to 70% of your IT cost base vis-a-vis the business applications they look after. And then obviously you've got your finance stakeholders all the way up to the CFO of the organization, who have a different an adjacent set of needs. And so you can find yourself building a lot of dashboards for these three groups of stakeholders. And if they're all coalesced together, it can be, for someone like me in my current role, it can feel a little bit like you're drinking from the fire hose. You're almost overwhelmed with it. And so in my current daily life, whether it's TBM or anything else, the things that get my attention are the cases where the person's taken the time to think about, how do I cut through the clutter and noise to talk about something that's particularly relevant. And the best way for them to do that is to do a little bit of basic research. I mean, if they're going to cold call me, if they've got a solution and they haven't spent time working out what's Richard's cost base, or finding out through other channels or other non-financial reports, how Richard's business is performing, or the business that he supports is performing, then you are literally cold calling, and you should expect a fairly high knockback rate. I think, as I said, it's really important to observe and listen to your stakeholders. And if they don't have a problem that you're solving, or they're not ready for it, that's okay. I think you just move on to somebody who is. Secondly, I'd say if you've done that, just be really clear and crisp. Like, don't go in there with 50 pages or 30 dashboards or whatever. Just focus on maybe no more than three things. It might just be their total expense base, their cloud costs, and application TCO. Like, you don't need to convert these people into disciples in one meeting, right? They're going to be converted through a regular drip feeding of bit by bit, using the information from TBM the way that we consume oxygen, water, Wi-Fi, and other things. Eventually you will assimilate to them and it becomes your normal. So yeah, don't feel the urge to like literally back up a whole dump truck full of information and just drop on them and say, there you go, we've got transparency, take your pick. Like, they don't have time. They're not going to have the time or interest, generally speaking, to do that. So I think it's just being really focused is important.
So, and that's a really important point as well. But if, as a CIO now, just roughly what percentage of your time, and this is probably a really difficult question to answer, but what percentage of your time would you set aside for TBM related activities, financial management, that sort of stuff? Would it be kind of under 5%? And in terms of,
depends on the time of year, of course, but I would say in peacetime it's about 5%, and in wartime, i.e. budgeting season, maybe 10 to 15 tops. What consumes the rest of my time? Technology, risk management, and cyber. Huge amount of time. Delivery management of business outcomes, because guess what? The business, like our external customers, wants more for less. They want it faster. They want it finer grained. There's a lot of pressure on CIOs to deliver 2x to 10x improvements in delivery velocity. And there's a lot of transformational things we have to do to achieve that. Whether it's scaled agile, whether it's DevSecOps, and implementing those type of changes on top of a fairly mature organization all at the same time is hard. And then of course I've got workforce management, so I'm managing about 300 people across multiple locations, and we've got to constantly make sure that the profile of that workforce is positioning us to have the right skills at the right place at the right time at the right price point, which is a constantly moving target, because the skills that we said we needed for the future 3 years ago are very different from the skills that we say we need now for 3 years from now. So all of those other things, that's before I even talk about the back-to-back meetings, the 100 emails a day, and the 3 people who will walk up to me every 10 meters I walk in an open plan building to tell me about their problems is factored into account. So that's why I say, yeah, when you're dealing with CIOs who are in bigger roles than my own, if they're managing 1,000+ people, I mean, they're going to be very time poor, and they're going to be very overwhelmed with information, and they're going to be dealing with some of these other high priorities. So your ask is, how do you make TBM an equal, if not higher priority than those things?
Yeah, yeah. So if you get a minute of your time, you've got to make it worthwhile, right? Because that's
Well, yeah, and I've spent time with like if I go back to when I was in tech finance here at CBA, talking to the then group CIO, you know, I did 2 things. So I wrote a 2-page paper, which laid out, you know, the problem and the proposed solution. Did my research, you know, behind that paper to make sure I'm doing a you know, proper diagnostic around the problems I saw that the CIO and the CFO were experiencing, and I took that to a conversation with each of them, you know, which resonated with them, and they were like, "Yep, this makes sense to us." The proposed solution that I laid forward was to do a reboot of Aptio so that we could support that more surgical application cost management agenda, which they felt was important, given it was going to save, you know, $100 million a year plus if fully executed. And then they said, Richard, yeah, now go and implement your own proposal. So that's what I then spent the next 2 years doing.
fantastic. Now that's coming from a senior executive. I mean, you ran the TBM program plus other stuff in that role that you're just talking about. Yeah, but for you to go and approach the more senior folks, you've done your research and you've created those artifacts that'll make a difference and you know, give you a
Yeah,
seat at the table. But that applies
yeah.
to everybody, right? That applies to
It,
the financial analyst who's talking to a cost center manager, as it does to a
correct.
CIO talking to a CIO.
Yeah, yeah. Look, in the case of those executives that I spoke to, look, all executives will have their right-hand people that, so, you know, in the case of the CIO, they'll often have a technology COO. In the case of the CFO, it'll obviously be like the tech CFO or a corporate center or shared services CFO. So certainly getting some buy-in from them along the way is important, and a good mechanism for you to, you know, test your hypotheses that, hey, there's a big problem to solve here, and I think TBM can help the organization solve it.
Yeah, yeah,
So
excellent.
don't do it alone, I guess what I'm saying. You
Yeah,
need to build a coalition of the willing. This is a multi-dimensional problem. It is not a finance solution. It is not an IT solution. In my experience, both pre and post my current role, is TBM works best if the CIO and the CFO are joined in of the joint view that there's an opportunity or problem to be solved here. And obviously the CFO might have a slightly different lens on that problem. The CFO might just be secretly thinking technology is too big and I just need it to be lower. And the
yeah,
CIO could be sitting there thinking, I'm delivering heaps of value. I just need the CFO to see it. Right. So they may be looking at different ends of the same elephant, but so long as they're aligned on TBM can provide the relevant illumination to them to solve their shared problem, then happy days.
excellent, excellent. And I think folks, that's great insight from Richard from both sides of the fence. And for me, I think that the big message here is it doesn't matter how senior you are in your role or what designation you have. Yeah, you've got to do your homework and you've got to put your value on the table. Just one kind of final question on that, Richard, and you know, we could talk about talk about this stuff for the rest of the day, and unfortunately we don't have that time.
Mm.
But just the kind of final question on this: if the TBM people don't come talk to you, when do you go to TBM? Just at the end of the month to kind of look at
Well,
your
in my
stuff?
current role, I don't talk to the TBM office. I rarely talk to the TBM office. The only time I do
Mhm.
is because I used to run that team, and I'm just reaching into I'm using my backstage pass to chat to them. But no, TBM is lived and breathed through the finance business partners, right? The information, like the TBM platform, that is there, to use the expression, like a Batman utility belt for the finance business partner to you know, have technology finance conversations with me that go beyond a traditional P&L. But I also self-serve a lot. So if you get your TBM design right, I self-serve probably 90% of my requirements. There's only a small 10% I might ask my finance business partner or the TBM office if I'm looking for something, can't find it, or come to a conclusion that I've got a new use case for them to go and put into their backlog to build a dashboard on, or some form of insight on.
Right. Okay. Okay. So what I've heard and folks, what you've heard in the last kind of 30 minutes is, as a TBM practitioner or a TBM executive, don't just rely on the fundamental baseline. Do your work, do your engagement, and take something of value to your customers and win them over, because they've got a bunch of other stuff to do, which is as important or more important. Is their priorities that we need to fit into. Fantastic.
Just one quick overlay to my last comments. Zahid, is obviously at CBA we're in what I call a steady state. So we're in more of a BAU mode. So I'm not expecting the TBM office to be in my face. Obviously, if TBM for you is if you're early on in your journey and TBM is a program or project or an initiative, then the TBM office will play a very different role. It will be playing the same role that any centralized program management will play for a major change, right? Which will be a mixture of delivery, OCM, and communications and direct engagement with stakeholders and users and so on. So I'm not saying that all TBM office should be sort of in the background behind finance or anyone else. It'll depend on where you're at on your journey. But in a steady state, TBM for us isn't a program anymore. It's just the way we run our business.
Part of the DNA.
Yeah.
Wonderful. Richard, thank you very much for taking time out of your busy schedule. I know you've got risk in AI and all of those other things to deal
AI
with.
is the other thing that we have to spend our time on.
We appreciate your time, folks. I hope you enjoyed that as much as I did and found lots of insight in that. Please do sign up for the next TBM Tuesday in a month's time. Richard, have a great day, and everybody else have a lovely day, and we'll see you again very soon.
Thanks, Zahid, and thanks everyone who joined.
Thanks, mate. All the best.